Riverdale Carnival presents the Archies.
Take care of the kissing booth while we're singing, Sabrina.
Okay, everybody, here we go with our new hit record, Sugar, Sugar!
Sugar, oh honey, honey, you are my candy girl, and you got me wanting you. Honey, oh
for the ride. Watch football live and cable free on your favorite networks. YouTube TV. Try it free.
One is the loneliest number that you'll ever do. Two can be as bad as one. It's the loneliest number since the number one. No is the saddest experience you'll ever know. Yes, it's the saddest
모드라니.
방탄소년단이 소셜 아티스트 부문을 수상한 후 해외 투어 일정을 진행했습니다.
Look over yonder. What do you see? The sun is rising, most definitely. A new day is coming. Ooh, people are changing. Ain't it beautiful? Ooh, crystal blue persuasion. Better get ready. Gonna see the light. Love is the answer. And that's alright. So don't you give up now. So easy to find. Just look to your soul. Look to your soul. And open your mind. Crystal blue persuasion. It's a new vibration. Crystal blue persuasion. Crystal blue persuasion. Maybe tomorrow, when he looks down every green field, in every town, all of his children, in every nation, there'll be peace and good brotherhood. Crystal blue persuasion. Yeah. Crystal blue persuasion. Crystal blue persuasion. She asked him why I'm a hairy guy. I'm hairy noon and night, night, night. My is a fright. I'm hairy high and low, but don't ask me why, 'cause he don't know. It's not for lack of bread, like the Grateful Dead. Darling, give me a head with hair, long, beautiful hair, shining, gleaming, streaming, flaxen, waxen. Give me down to there, shoulder length longer. Here, baby, there, mama, everywhere, daddy, daddy, grow it, show it, long as I can grow my hair. I let it fly in the breeze, sing it caught in the trees. It's a home for the fleas in my hair. A home for the fleas, a hive for the buzzing bees, a nest for birds. There ain't no words for the beauty, the splendor, the wonder of my hair. Grow it, show it, long as I can grow it, my hair.
I want it long, straight, curly, fuzzy, snappy, shaggy, raspy, woolly, greasy, fleecy, shiny, steaming, gleaming, flaxy, waxy.
Got it, folks, got it. Twisted, beaded, braided, powdered, flowered, and confetti, mangled, tangled, spangled,
And spaghetti.
oh, say, can't you see my eyes? If you can, then my hair's too short. Here, down to there, down to there, down to where it stops by itself.
Don't never have to cut it 'cause it stops by itself.
All head with hair, long, beautiful hair, shining, gleaming, streaming, flaxen, waxen. Now won't you give me down to there? Shoulder length longer. Here, baby, there, mama, everywhere, daddy, daddy, grow it, show it, long as I can grow it, my grow it, show it, long as I can grow it, my
Don't you know I'm too busy thinking about my baby? Oh, and I ain't got time for nothing else. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. for what it can buy. And I ain't got time to sit down and wonder what makes a birdie fly. And I don't have the time to think about what makes a flower grow. And I never give it a second thought to where the rivers flow. Oh yeah, and I ain't got time for nothing else. Oh yeah, said I ain't got time to discuss the weather, how long it's gonna last. And I ain't got time to do no study once I get out of class. Telling ya I'm just a fella, said I got a one-track mind. And when it comes to thinking about anything but my baby, I just don't have the time. Oh yeah, and I ain't got time for nothing else. Don't you know I'm too busy thinking about my baby? Oh, and I ain't got time for nothing else. Oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah.
So you'll PowerPoint, and then you'll pick it, and then you'll go to slideshow, and then from beginning, and that's all you click. Okay? Do you know who's going to speak first? So I'm just going to do this up here.
You're live. You're live.
Stand up here and hold it. Okay. Perfect. Okay, perfect. All right.
You're Jane of all trades. Or should I just say Jamie of all trades? All right, do you think we're ready? I think so.
I think so. I didn't put one they can stand, but it's just going to be a minute or two.
Okay, got it.
Do you want a chair for him?
You can bring a chair up. We could.
I'll do that.
Okay. Hello, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started now. For those of you who may not know me, I'm Jill James. I'm the Associate Director for Information Products here at the National Agricultural Library. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to go ahead and get started with the remarks from our speakers who have joined us. And now I'll be calling up Tim Shepke, one of our terrific reference librarians who will be introducing our speakers. Thank you.
So welcome to the NAL staff and to our visitors for this celebration of the 50 years of this building, which, thanks to Jamie Flood, we know the exact date. Sometime last spring, Jill sent me a very innocent email in which I responded. She asked, when did the building open? And I looked in the chronologies that are available to us, and I had my own timeline. And I just said, sometime in 1969. I was never able to find an exact date, not a single photograph of the opening. Those of you who were with us for the cornerstone laying, we know that that day was covered gloriously by the events and the photographs that we have, but not a single photograph of this building. This is by way of saying, come back on Friday, because I have a theory and a hypothesis about why that is the case. We're going to have two professional historians who are going to be talking to us about the Department of Agriculture and the state of agriculture in 1969, 1970, 71. And I have not spoken with them about what their presentations are, but I have a theory, and I'm going to be curious to see if this actually pans out. Maybe totally wrong. So this afternoon, we were at the side of the building, and sorry for miscommunication about the tree planting ceremony, but I do want to acknowledge the fact that now the National Agricultural Library is the only place in the state of Maryland where you can see a descendant of the oldest living liberty tree in the United States. 400 years old on the campus of St. John's College in Annapolis. The tree was one of 13 in each of the original colonies, where the colonists assembled outside the General Assembly. They did not want to be part of that, to make plans for the American Revolution. Incredible stories that must be held by that tree. Unfortunately, in 1999, a hurricane passed through, as they sometimes do in the area, and the tree, which had been in failing health, that was the final death knell. And the state arborist said that it could not remain. The tree was cut down, and the remnants have been used in various purposes, but we actually do have the genetic coding for the tree, and from that we have grown. The experts have grown seedlings, and this afternoon we planted one right here on the grounds and celebrated that fact by in song and word. So this is a picture of the original tree, and I just wanted you to be aware of that. And then tidbits. Okay, so in preparing for this, the focus today really is going to be on local history. And sometimes it's referred to as hyperlocal, meaning just like right in this area, meaning Beltsville, Laurel, College Park, Greenbelt. But we're going to do hyperlocal, which is this building and the surrounding area. And in thinking and planning for this, I thought that, that I would share two kind of local, not local, but something from the 1969 era. And there, we could choose thousands of things. But I was trying to get something of the flavor of the era. And I thought I would ask each of you, who remembers what, and we have a show of hands of who had consciousness in 1969. But those of us who remember that period certainly remember a TV program called Candid Camera, Alan Funt. And he would take a camera around and would film unsuspecting people doing, he would set up situations. The classic is a woman drives into a gas station and says her car's not running. And when the gas station attendant, remember those days when they would come out and help you, opens the hood, there's no engine in the car. You know, how did that happen? And so you watch on camera the reaction that. Well, in 1969, actually only a month into 1969, it was a year, the preceding year and 69, a year of hijackings of airplanes. It happened all the time. And it so happens that in February, a plane that was headed to Miami Beach was hijacked to Cuba. That's where they all went. But on this flight was Alan Funt. He was the host of Candid Camera. Very serious situation. The two hijackers with a knife pointed at a stewardess, and they're going to take over the plane. Someone, there was dead silence when the hijackers start their crime. Dead silence until someone points out, had seen Alan Funt get on the plane and says, "This isn't a hijacking, it's an episode of Candid Camera." And the plane burst into laughter. They could not convince the passengers that they indeed were being hijacked to Cuba. They didn't realize it until they actually overflew Miami and landed in Havana. So that just is a sense of what maybe the late 1960s were. And then I wanted to do hyper local. And just quickly, before I introduce our speakers, show you. Okay, this person was alive in 1969. This is a photograph of myself at that time. So there you go. All right. So we have a great lineup of three distinguished speakers who are going to talk to us about the importance of Beltsville, of Greenbelt, of Prince George's County. And I'm going to introduce our first speaker, who is John Peter Thompson. He is the chair of the Prince George's County Historic Preservation Commission, and he's been on that since 2003. He's also the president of the Maryland Nursery and Landscape Association and has been an active member of the U.S. National Invasive Species Council Advisory Committee and is well connected to the local nursery community. John Peter is a descendant of a well-known nursery that was just up the street, the Benke Nursery. And he is a treasure trove, not only of local history, but also is remarkably knowledgeable about the collection at the library, and specifically the special collections. I'd like you to extend a very warm welcome to John Peter Thompson.
This is much easier to do if I'm on flat ground and I can walk around and not fall off from high ground. Let's see, am I anywhere near anything?
Here, just put your hands right on the, there we go.
All right.
Okay, you're.
Excellent.
And Jamie, we're gonna get the PowerPoint in play here.
I don't have PowerPoint.
Oh, you don't? Okay, very good.
What would I do with a PowerPoint? I'd be up here saying, and what is that? I want to thank everybody for spending some time, and I understand I have 10 minutes, 15? 10 minutes. I'm doing the first 10,000 years of the hyper history of Beltsville. And I've just used up a minute. So now I have 9 minutes to talk about this. So let's move forward a little bit. I'll get you towards colonial times and see if we can do 300 and some years in a few minutes. This land, before the English came, was part of the Piscataway indigenous peoples area. Now, of course, they didn't claim land as we from European culture do, but this is land that they used. they tended to be agriculturally based people. In other words, they farmed along with hunting. They hunted, they fished, but they performed agriculture. They cleared the land and they grew crops. Their last stronghold was just down the creek, as it were, in Bladensburg, before the English settlements finally drove them west and into memory, though there are Piscataway people still in southern Prince George's and Charles County. So we're here in Prince George's County, a county that's surrounded and defined by two rivers, the Potomac and the Patuxent, and it's actually a county that has two sides to it, politically, socially, and historically, the Potomac side and the Patuxent side. And Beltsville, interestingly enough, looks towards the Patuxent, but's kind of centrally located, and we're going to move very fast now. You know the story of Lord Baltimore? Everybody say yes, because I need to skip over that, right? Lord Baltimore owned all the land after he got his charter. This land that we call Beltsville today was controlled and owned by the Snowden family, whose historic home is still up in Laurel, Montpelier. They had an earlier home, which once was on the USDA property and now on interior Snowden Hall along the Patuxent River. It is interesting that the Snowdens, while growing tobacco was the way to make money, agriculture again, they're unique among the Prince Georgians because they found iron. And Beltsville's first claim to fame is Merkirk, or an iron. Iron was discovered here. The Snowdens found a way of making money. And it helped that Beltsville is on the high ground of Prince George's County. We have a high school called High Point for a reason. It's the highest point in Prince George's County. Tobacco doesn't grow on high ground. It likes to be down in the floodplain. So finding iron up here was a benefit to the Snowden family. Moving forward fast, the land doesn't lend itself to the cash crop tobacco. It does lend itself to grazing. There's a limited amount of iron works, Merkirk iron furnace up there. So the land was subdivided, you know how this works, sold off to smaller farmers. There are many names. I'm only going to focus on one. Beltsville is not Beltsville because of the Beltway. It's Beltsville because of a farmer, tobacco grower, and sometime tobacco broker named Truman Belt. He basically had he owned the land at what we call Old Beltsville. Fortunately for him, especially since he was a part-time tobacco broker, the main road from Baltimore to points south and north was the Baltimore Pike, which you know is US 1. It's right there out the road. And that went right through, heading north through his land, so that was good. A man named Van Horn, right up the road, maybe a mile and a half, built a tavern, Van Horn's Tavern. That was good. And then high tech came. It was sort of the Microsoft of the 1830s. We call it the railroad. And the railroad crossed Baltimore Pike about a mile, less than a mile, north of this building. And because it crossed there, it became a crossroads. That allowed small entrepreneurs, blacksmiths, wheelwrights, the people you need to support agriculture to begin to build a community, small community, around 1835. I have to skip forward. How many minutes do I have? You have 5 minutes. Got it. All right, skipping a bunch of information. I don't have time to talk about John Carlisle Herbert, congressman. His house still stands on USDA property. It's known as Walnut Grange. He was a congressman for the 14th and 15th Congresses. I think he was Speaker of the House, the Maryland General Assembly, lawyer and planter. His property, when he dies, it is acquired by Richard Duckett Hall, and eventually that's the land that is the core of the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center. But let me talk about We have the railroad. We have main points south, north, from the new U.S. Capitol to Baltimore to the Mason-Dixon line. Then we have a little adventure called the Civil War. On my birthday, interestingly enough, July 12th, 1864, a Confederate cavalry unit, known by history, you can look it up later, called Gilmore's Raid. General Bradley Johnson, a Marylander who went south, had circled around. He burned a governor's home, burned some railroad bridges around Baltimore, scared the daylights out of the Yankees. And he decided his mission was to come down, cross the Patuxent, go to St. Mary's County, and free 20 to 30,000 Confederate prisoners. Why could he do this and nobody cared? Because Jubal Early was trying to capture Abraham Lincoln at the same time on Georgia Avenue. It wasn't called Georgia Avenue then. So he has a young captain, Captain Emack. If you're a Beltsville person, you know that name. Emack's had a home, which you would have been able to see right out the front door of this library. It then became a drive-in movie theater, and well, that's not my part of the lecture. Captain Emack is the head. He leads his company of soldiers down what us Beltsvillians know as Powder Mill Road. He comes to the church that still stands, the Episcopal Church at St. John's Hill. He plants his light artillery, and below him, here, at this building, which was not here, were some Union cavalry soldiers from Michigan lounging around. Their officers were across the street at what I think is Panera Bread, but used to be an inn. They were having lunch, and the owner, a woman, looked out the window and said, I think you got a problem. They rushed out in time to find their men and horses being attacked by the Confederates coming down from the north. The Michigan cavalry got on their horses and beat a retreat across Paint Branch, which is that way. Think headed to the University of Maryland. The Confederates, having pushed them off this field where this library stands, went on down US 1 to where eventually USDA had a farm where they grew cherry trees. We know it as Cherry Hill. Put their guns there, and they could fire down into the little college community called College Park. And then the Confederates, having no opposition, zipped on down to College Park, where General Johnson's cousin, I think it was a professor at the College of Agriculture, now the University of Maryland, had lunch, and I'm probably running out of time. Unfortunately, he was unable to continue his attack into Washington. The Secretary of War, having discovered that he had no plan for an attack from the north, had organized a few hundred federal office workers, armed them with whatever they could find, pipes, pitchforks, hammers, pencils, and marched them out to Bladensburg to defend against the Confederate cavalry. Unfortunately for them, the Confederates had another little pitched battle, by the way, when they got to Greenbelt Road, just down the road, casualties 2, I think I remember, and then had to head off back to Silver Spring because the main army was retreating. After this great and glorious Battle of Beltsville, which you didn't, I know some of you know about it because you know me, but most of you didn't know there was a very famous Civil War engagement here, and now you know. Prince George's County quieted down, shall we say, the Golden Age and the Silver Age, which is a strange way of looking at it because it was only the Golden Age for Europeans who owned land. For most people, it was nothing of the Golden Age because it was the period of enslavement in this county. Civil War ends. There's not a lot of workforce for tobacco, small tobacco farmers. There are people who are still here, and they are trying to make a living. Cattle. We didn't talk about the Herberts with sheep. There's still an agricultural base that is making a living, and Prince George's from 1865 up until when I'm going to finish World War I, is still agriculture, and it's still growing tobacco, and it's growing what will become known as truck farming. And these days it was with the railroad, you would put your carrots and your lettuce and whatever you were growing for the markets in Baltimore onto railroads that took it to Baltimore markets. The roads would come in 1921, the first paved road, but not here in Beltsville. In about the Roosevelt administration, the Hall family enters into negotiations. A little unclear how long that takes, but eventually they're going to sell to the federal government their 400 or 500 acres of Walnut Grange. By 1910, we begin to see Beltsville as the center of an ever-growing, expansive agricultural research facility. The town of Beltsville, meanwhile, Old Beltsville, had been laid out and was populated first by the farmers and dairymen, what I grew up calling the government workers. Eventually, New Beltsville, that's where the super cool 1960 houses with air conditioning were the scientists and the administrators. This was Beltsville. It was the home of the scientists and the workers for the world's largest agricultural research service. World War I comes. Agriculture is beginning to fail in Prince George's County. Yes, we can have truck farms, but technology is changing. Farming, the land is becoming too expensive. But Beltsville thrives because it is connected to this facility. By this I mean the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center. I forgot to mention one last thing, and I know I'm running out of time, and I know Father George will like this, but a boyhood friend of President Grant was a U.S. Navy admiral, and after the war, he bought a farm right up the road here at the next stop up, the Vansville stop, and that farm became the Ammondale Normal Institute. It survived and made a profit until the 1920s. And most of the farmers in Prince George's were able to survive until the 1920s. The Depression economically brings down individual farming. But Beltsville is kind of insulated from this, not that it didn't feel the effect, but with the growth of this facility, Beltsville continues to grow and expand. Now, I promised to do the 10,000 years and stop vaguely in the 1920s. And as I've told this, I'm remembering how much more I want to tell you, but I think my 10 minutes are up. Thank you.
So thank you, John Peter, for giving us that 10,000-year history in 10 minutes. Our next speaker is going to be Gene Meyer. Gene, where are you, Gene? Okay, why don't you come on up, Gene? So Gene Meyer is an author, and he has a distinguished career with the local rag, which you know is the Washington Post. And he has written extensively for the Post, but he's retired from the Post, and now he's an independent writer. His articles have appeared in U.S. News and World Report, Washingtonian, Maryland Life, and he's also actually an author of several books. And when we finish this presentation, and not after Aaron speaks, I'll flash the two covers of the books that were of our authors today. So Gene also is important to me because when I started trying to understand why the library was here and its geographical importance and historical significance, I did come across his book, which is in the Enoch Pratt Free Library, and I was gratified to read in this about the fact that he had done investigation, first-person accounts of Route 1, and in particular, Route 1 right here. And I really got a flavor for what existed here, and I'm hoping that we're going to get an extension of that with Gene's talk right now. So would you welcome, please, Gene Meyer.
Well, Tim, thank you very much. John, Peter, and I, in addition to sharing a love of history, also have the same birthday, July 12th. So, small world. I first drove down, actually I wasn't driving, I was a passenger, down Route 1 on a family trip in the early 50s. And my earliest recollection, my family lived in New York suburbs, was threading our way through the row house streets of Baltimore, and also signs that said soft shoulders. And I thought that was really hysterical. I mean, soft shoulders, what does that mean? That was 1952. I came to Washington to work out of college in 1964. In 1965, I moved up to Philadelphia to work for the Philadelphia Evening Bulletin. And I had a U-Haul trailer, and the BW Parkway had opened in 1957, and you couldn't take the U-Haul trailer, so I had to go up Route 1. And back then, and this was a year after the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Maryland was a southern state, still is a southern state. And I remember vividly the colored signs on some of the motels and motor courts driving north from Washington up to Philadelphia. Some of those motor courts would remain years later, although the signs would be missing and some of them would be closed. Fast forward, I came to work at the Washington Post, and I had the luxury of spending 7 days exploring Route 1 from Pennsylvania to the district line. It was 1977. Now, I should back up a little bit just to mention that US 1 was considered the main street of the East Coast from Calais, Maine to Key West, Florida. The Maryland portion was paved with macadam in 1906, and it became US 1 as part of the federal highway numbering system in 1925. In 1938, the Federal Writers Project of the Works Progress Administration did a guide to US 1, which I used in my travels in 1977. And so I'll start with that. Let's see if I can get this to work. Okay. So in 1977, I took this trip. I spent 7 days, I said. The first day I was spent from the Pennsylvania line to essentially to Baltimore. And then I spent 6 days going from Baltimore to D.C. That's 33.8 miles, stopping along the way, obviously, spending a lot of time interviewing people, taking pictures, and just getting a sense of the old road and the portions that were known as Dead Man's Curve. There was one right up here in Beltsville, and the road was known as Bloody Mary for all the accidents that occurred. And by that time, the Interstate 95 had opened in 1971. So it was really yesterday's interstate. And the way I decided to do this was in 1976, driving back from a family Thanksgiving in New York and coming around the Baltimore Beltway. It was very clogged. So I decided to get off at Route 1. And it was literally a ghost highway. There was nobody in it. And I said, I've got to come back and explore it. So a year later, I did. And then, of course, as people did back in those days, I made a scrapbook. And so what you're about to see are some of the ephemera from the scrapbook that I made, and I'll walk you through the route. So this was a sign, obviously, U.S. Route 1 southbound. Vet's Liquor, I think the sign is still up there in Beltsville. Obviously, that was post-war, early post-war, and that's a real landmark. I don't know if the neon still works, probably doesn't, but that's part of old Route 1. Farm cabins. The motor court were called farm cabins, and this was in Berwyn. And the geographical division between Berwyn and College Park is a little blurry. And I've never really, I know Berwyn and College Park are discrete municipalities, but in common usage, it's hard to distinguish. So the back of the farm cabins postcard, the phone number is just 4 digits, Tower 5259. They were owned by Mr. and Mrs. C. Byer. Modern steam heated cabins. Inner spring mattresses, how modern is that? Hot showers and bath, 9 miles north of Washington, D.C. on US 1 in Berwyn, Maryland. That's long gone. Now, right across the street from here were the Delhaven White House cottages, and there was a motel family, really a motel dynasty, the Irwins, who opened their first motor court really north of Baltimore and north of Bel Air. It was called the Delhaven, started in the 1920s. And eventually, in the late 30s, they opened their new motel, the Delhaven White House Cottages. Now, in the front, you'll see on the slide, it's a colonial era tavern. This was Rhodes Tavern, and famously, it's where George Washington stopped for dinner on his last trip from Philadelphia to Mount Vernon in 1798. Not so famously, maybe infamously, in the basement were manacles and for slaves. And when the Irwins took over, they eventually removed those. But that was part of the history as well. I should mention that some of the, on my trip in Route 1, there were several of these former, quote, colored motels. The building still existed, and some of the families were still there, but, and mostly north of Baltimore, not entirely. There was McLean's, there was Hall's, there was Bass's, there was Conti's. Now, one motor court I visited was actually, it was not in this stretch, it was in Elk Ridge, I believe. And it was on Buttermilk Hill. And this was 1977, remember? And the couple who owned it still lived in part of it, but they're white. And they had closed their entire operation rather than integrate. So those centers were still very much extant. Now, of course, after integration, there were no more colored signs, but there was sort of a code. And some of the motel owners would talk about locals, and they wouldn't rent the locals, and that was their way of sort of getting around the law. So the Irwins had this Delhaven White House Cottages, and these are a couple of postcards from the 40s and 50s. And that's the back of the postcards. One has a postmark from 1948. The writing is not all that interesting. The family went to Washington, D.C., and they were writing back home. And there's a picture I took in 1977, and you can see the Rhodes Tavern with its colonnade front, and it was obviously an impressive colonial building. I went back in 1999. In the meantime, I had written a book called Maryland Lost and Found, published in 1986. It had 2 paperback editions, first one in 2000, then 2003. And to update the paperback edition, I added more photographs and more facts. And so I went back in 1999, I took these pictures. And the Rhodes Tavern was still there, but the whole area was fenced off. And you can see the cabins were abandoned, and they were soon to be abolished, raised rather, and replaced by IKEA in 2002 in a mixed-use development. Now, just south of where we are now was the Colonial Plaza Motel and dormitories. And this was opened by a man named John Beltsville on Pearl Harbor Day, December 7th, 1941. He was quite a colorful character. When I met him, he was in his 80s, and he was a Pathé newsreel cameraman. And he was there in 1945 when he should have been down at the White House, so he was fired. But he continued to operate this expansive Colonial Plaza motel and dormitories, and would advertise in the New York Times and various papers, and school groups would come down and they would stay in these kind of bunk beds in tents. And he had a skating rink, which was taken by when the Beltway opened, and he had a swimming pool, and it was a big deal. And that was here during my trip. And there are a couple of postcards from Colonial Plaza, long gone. There are garden apartments there now. Now, I mentioned the Irwin family that opened Delhaven up in north of Bel Air, and then the Delhaven White House cottages. And one of the brothers opened the Royal Pine Best Western Motel on Route 1. I believe it's still there. The family would eventually open another motel on 198 and I-95. So there were a few families like that. There was kind of a motel dynasty on Route 1. Now this Hillcrest Motor Court, I don't believe it's there anymore. I think the building in front lasted longer than the cabins behind it. And the brochure says that it boasted room telephones, big deal, and a new television in each room free. And one of the noted attractions was DC stadiums in the area. So we know that opened in 1961, so that helps to date this brochure. It said that Hillcrest offers modern comfort, a convenient address, and the charm of early Americana. Spend your relaxing hours in an area full of historic interest. Spacious grounds and abundant lawn furniture placed around a famous old mansion that vibrated with social activity at the turn of the century. The original deed holders were actively involved in underground slave traffic during the Civil War days. I'm not sure if that meant that they were part of the Underground Railroad or they were capturing fugitive slaves. It's unclear. But this was south of the Beltway, on the right-hand side if you're heading south. Now near the Hillcrest Motel was the Little Tavern, which no longer exists. But that was a popular little institution well into this century. Now, closer to the University of Maryland campus, there was an old motor court called the Town Motel. And when I drove down Route 1 in 1977, and as I think about it, that's 42 years ago. So at the time, it seemed very current to me, but this is really history, folks. So there were half a dozen of these little stone cabins, and it was all shut down. Now you may have noticed, you drive by the town liquor store. It's a fairly modern building on the left as you drive south, just before the campus. Now further south was the College Park Motel. I don't know if the building is still there or not. I wrote a separate story about it called it Heartbreak Hotel because of all the tragedy that seemed to occur there. The woman who ran the place kept a diary. And I'll read you a little bit from one day in 1975. 1976. Her diary read like a police blotter, detailing domestic disputes, dog fights, fires, suspected kidnapping of children, bounced checks, broken windows, death by natural causes, and apparent suicide. Some entrances from her spiral notebooks. January 20th, 1976, 5:30 p.m. Mr. Mayhew called the rescue squad for lady in her room. Rescue squad took her from here at 5:30 p.m. She was drunk and out of her mind. March 11th, 1977, found mad dead. Truck driven 18 hours on road, wanted to sleep. Beltsville rescue squad said maybe alcohol and pot, and he fell and cracked his head open. Autopsy, death from acute alcoholism. April 7th, 1977, No one answered in one cabin, TV on, curtains down. Man face up, lying on the bed with blood on his hands and shotgun standing on floor, upright next to his bed. It gets more gruesome. A single day, December 19th, 1975, filled several pages. It began around 8:30 when a man at the motel on a weekend pass had turned out from a mental hospital phoned his counselor to say he planned to kill himself. When the counselor arrived, Wagner noted, the man was breaking windows, etc. Her husband went to the room and the man slashed both his wrists and started throwing things. Police arrived at 11:40. The rescue squad 10 minutes later. At 5 p.m., she listed the damage. Bloody mattress pad, bedspread, pillowcases, blanket, towels, broken wall mirror, no chance of recovering. He had no money. 2 hours later, her 16-year-old son came running up to the office and asked me who was living on the porch because some man is dumping about 25 dogs in crates in a room behind the wall. The tenant was a woman in her 60s who Wagner wrote had put these 25 dogs in with different vets and never paid the bill. So this vet dumped them on her doorstep. I telephoned her immediately and told her the animals had to be out by morning. When the animals were still there by noontime uncaged, the motel manager called police, who arrived soon afterward. The woman then proceeded to start taking 2 or 3 dogs at a time and walked up and down US 1. She also took a lot of them in a taxi. She again deposited them with different vets. Last I heard, the Hyattsville Animal Hospital finally had to put 6 of the dogs to sleep, and she was suing them for this. So, Heartbreak Hotel. You know, who knew? You drive down these roads and, you know, what stories lurk behind the doors. That was worth a separate story, definitely. So here's some College Park ephemera from my April 1977 trip on yesterday's interstate. There's a match cover. Remember match covers? They were fun to collect. You'd be hard-pressed to find any today. From the College Park Hotel, and there's a business card. And of course, there's the Maryland Terps football schedule for that year. And finally, instead of B&Bs and and Airbnbs, back in those days, they had guest houses. And you drive down maybe Rhode Island Avenue, which was alternate Route 1, and with your family, and you'd stay in a guest house. And that's how we got to Washington. And I think my time's up. Thank you. There's the book.
So Gene has solved the mystery that I had in doing research about the library. I have in my notes a sign that that's talking about the demolition of the skating rink at the Beltway. And I thought, why was there a skating rink right where Wayne lives actually now? So it was part of this Colonial Plaza complex. Interesting. So our next speaker is Aaron Markovich, and Aaron is the Executive Director of Maryland Milestones and Anacostia Trails Heritage Area, Inc. Mouthful, but it does. And if you get on their on Aaron's mailing list, you find out events all throughout the area. It's a great way to keep aware of what's going on historically and culturally. So Aaron is past chair of the Prince George's County War of 1812 Commission. That was an important commemoration, and there are many artifacts left from that. And he's also a resident. He lives by what he preaches. He's a resident of Greenbelt, which, as he notes, was the planned utopian community of the 1930s. I'm sure it's still the utopian. Yes, it is. It is. I know it is. Yes. So without further ado, could I introduce Aaron Markovich, please?
Thank you. All right, and that's all the time we have. Yes, exactly. Thank you, John Peter and Gene. I appreciate having a moment to bring to you the present I'm bringing you as close as I can to the modern day. I appreciate the music that was being played. I ran an oldies show on college radio. I had listenership that was easily in the like tens. I had, and I also will note that I have something in common with Gene. I was born in 1977, so hope that doesn't make you feel too old. All right, I move around, so I apologize. Let's see if this thing works here. So you may have, we have heard about and we've talked about a lot of these things, so I'm going to flip through them very quickly. This is the Maryland Agricultural Experiment Station, aka the Rossborough Inn, which is now University of Maryland. We have the trolley, the streetcar that would have run up to Beltsville. You may know this crossing today. That is where Rhode Island Avenue crosses US 1. You can see there's traffic then, as there is traffic today. There's always traffic there, no matter what. This would have been known as the Beltsville Shuttle that would have been running up from about Greenbelt Road. It was a single track line that came out this way and was sort of a limited service type of thing. If you want to hear about the trolley thing, you got to take my bike ride that we do on the trolley. Here's a map of the road widening of US 1, the 11 miles that were widened from Baltimore down to about Laurel. But you can see that the widening occurred later on this southern section with then the extension of Rhode Island Avenue that was built in 1929. So whenever you're down near Franklin's in Hyattsville, that is a new section, a 1929 section. There's the little tavern that we were talking about. The little tavern is why I ended up writing the US 1 book, is because I was so annoyed and dispirited that the University of Maryland had torn down yet another cool thing on US 1. Very soon, the structures to the right of that little tavern will be torn down as well, again, much to my chagrin. So that whole property where the College Park City Hall is will be redeveloped. I had tried desperately to obtain a piece of that for the thing I'm going to talk about later, our Heritage Center. I tried to encourage the guys that were tearing it down to just sort of throw a piece of it up and over the dumpster, and they wouldn't give it to me. They said it was covered in lead. I said, yes, I know. I studied historic preservation, but they still wouldn't do it. There's Little Acres here in Beltsville, getting in closer, if anybody remembers that. We're going to keep on moving as fast as we can. Route 1 in 1970s. This is probably what more people start to remember about US 1. This is in Hyattsville. You can see the Lustine there, Pier 1 Imports, etc. That is all now housing and new development. We'll show you some more about Lustine here in a moment. There's the drive-in movie theater, which is now where the Costco is. This was in its X-rated days. Whenever you weren't really allowed to go in there. I've just been uncovering a few more pictures of this drive-in. I want to really kind of dig into it. One thing I want to mention, especially since Gene talked about some of those motels, is that I don't want to get crazy academic, but the permanence of landscape. Our landscape actually doesn't change very quickly unless it's really tried hard to move it. So that motel that Gene was talking about with the ice skating rink next to it, if you look on Google Maps at the West, I think it's Westfield apartment building that's right across from IKEA, you'll see that the shape of the property is exactly the shape of what a motel would have looked like. It's got the very straight edges to it, and you can actually sort of envision what that motel looked like. Same with the drive-in movie theater. If you drive around Costco, you can still get the sense of that big fan shape that a drive-in movie theater would have. The Delhaven, which Gene mentioned, and he had a much better picture. I immediately scrambled to take a picture of his picture. Note the bottom of that sign, that where it says White House there. We'll come back to that in a few moments. The Beltway and the growth of the area around this folks, with the cutting of the Beltway here, the traffic was already building on the Beltway, even from day one. There was a guy that I've gotten to know, Dave Murray, who's a Beltsville resident, and he's put together a lot of details about the history of Beltsville, and he was a surveyor over the area, and he said he was working on the Beltway project, and there was a woman in Greenbelt who would, every time the surveyors would come around to lay out the new section of the Beltway, she would sit on her front porch with a shotgun and warn them away until finally she passed away, and the sons immediately turned around and sold the property so the Beltway could get finished, but he said he got chased off of that property a few times. We also have the start of the metro. You can see on the side there, on the right side, is a GG1, Pennsylvania Railroad GG1 in its later days. That was the well-known electric engine that would have run up and down the Pennsylvania Railroad. So this is actually the new Carrollton stop, but this is the metro being built out at the time. Of course, the National Ag Library, in one of the grainier pictures I've ever used in a presentation. So we've jumped our way through that history as quickly as possible so that we can come up to what's been happening in the last years. So much has changed since then. The region around this area has been recognized for its unique history, such as Greenbelt, my planned utopian community, the oldest operating airfield in the world at College Park, the NASA Goddard, the world-recognized site with important satellite missions and projects such as the Webb Space Telescope, the University of Maryland growing to over 35,000 students studying hundreds of topics while still having agriculture at its core, such as it is whenever everybody else can study computer science and things. Lands have been preserved in the area, such as the Anacostia River and the tributaries along it, the Patuxent River and the areas around it with the Patuxent Wildlife Research Refuge, and then of course the great trails that are along these rivers. If you haven't been out on the trail system and you'd like to, just let me know. I'm always happy to take you out on a tour. And of course, buildings have been preserved. There's the Lustine Center that had been at the center of the Lustine dealership. And it has been turned into, well, when this picture was taken, there was an art center on the left and a workout center, but the art center has now gone away. So now instead of cars being parked inside there are people getting sweaty and running on Stairmasters and what have you. So all of this preservation of natural resources and history have come together, and we are now part of where you're sitting right now. You are at the center of the Maryland Milestones Heritage Center, Anacostia Trails. You can see us in the center of the document there. There are 13 heritage areas across the state of Maryland whose job it is to preserve and promote the history, art, culture, and nature of the regions. I won't read all of this, but it's all about bringing people together and talking about the things in the region. So I am very lucky to have a heritage area that has at the center the world's largest ag reserve, the world's largest ag library, all these amazing things. And I want to be able to tell those stories as part of it. And I want you to come to me and ask me for money so I can help you tell that story. We are under something called the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority. We were certified in 2001, covering northern Prince George's County. Agriculture is not our first story. We actually couch agriculture within the context of research, which makes more sense. We don't necessarily focus as deeply as what John Peter was talking about on some of that tobacco growing, but we focus on that research element of agriculture. We also focus very specifically on transportation and communications first. We didn't even talk about the fact that we had the telegraph that ran right along the Baltimore and Ohio. The entire staff came out for you today, so there's that. This is the map of our region. I'm going to step behind you, John Peter, here, just so folks can see. We're up here. You can see our large swath of the Ag Reserve with the Wildlife Refuge back there. And so, again, to put you in that sense, our area runs from Mount Rainier here at the DC line to Laurel over there and to Bowie over there. So this entire region is part of that heritage area and gives you a sense. I think one of the things that really stands out is the amount of green on this. For us being so close to Washington, D.C., the amount of green parkland and visitable areas is really quite impressive. Moving along, so we do things, as I mentioned, we do grants, a variety of grants. We help you develop signs and brochures. We work with communities. This morning I was working on a bike pedestrian program. Followed this afternoon, I was working on a Port Towns Day. This weekend is Port Towns Day and arts and ales and bike tours and all variety of things. So we're constantly working on tourism programs here in this region. Here's a few examples, the variety of meetings that we have and programs and what have you. I've been very lucky to work on all these different types of projects, the types of things that we have been doing, the trolley trail and its completion. We're very excited about what might be coming. Right now, the trolley trail more or less stops at Beltsville, at Branchville Road, Greenbelt Road, but the City of College Park is working on sort of fixing that upper stretch of Rhode Island Avenue so that people will continue to be able to bike up here. What you may not know is that in the first or second weekend of November, the Washington Area Bicycle Association will be bringing well over 300 to 400 people through the Ag Reserve. They do this every year. It's called the Cider Ride, and 300 to 400 people are out here visiting the sites that you all are related to. And we would love to make that connection even stronger. The Ag Reserve and this whole region here is really getting well known in the bicycling community as a very cool place to go on the weekends. They go out, Beaver Dam Road, or they go out some of these different roads, and they love to be in the Ag Reserve and the Wildlife Refuge and all these different places. So just keep that in mind as well. So just to mention, we have just finished our Heritage Center. We are located in the Pyramid Atlantic Arts Center in Hyattsville. It's directly across from Franklin's. If you have not visited there and you remember your days of industrial arts class, that is absolutely what this place is like. They have screen printing and paper making and all sorts of cool devices and equipment, and it's well worth coming to see. Inside is our Heritage Center, which is a visitor center and workshop space. And right there in the top upper left-hand corner, you can just see the edge of a piece of a neon sign. That is the bottom of that Delhaven White House Cottage sign. I had a gentleman approach me at a roadside conference that I was part of, and he said, "Oh, you're from the College Park Greenbelt area." I said, "Yeah." He said, "I've got a sign that I picked up." Oh dear, okay, what is the sign all about? He said, whenever they were tearing down the Delhaven, I know the Delhaven, when they were tearing it down, I was driving along and the sign was laying on the side of the road. I pulled my truck up, nobody was there, I put it in, and I drove away. Okay, that doesn't sound completely legit, but we're well past the statute of limitations on that. He said, "Do you want it?" Yes, I want it. He said, "I'm also a neon restorer. I'll fix the neon on it for you." Okay, fantastic. So he restored this sign for us. He put it together, put new equipment in there. He brought it down with another gentleman. We struggled for about an hour to get it up on the wall. We finally got it up on the wall. He sits back and he takes a look at it. And remember what Gene said? He goes, "Well, you know why they called it the White House, don't you?" I said, "It was a White House?" He goes, "No, it was segregated." I went, Prince George's County is a majority African-American community. That might be a problem for this particular sign on my wall. So since then, we have been working more and more. You may have recently heard about the Green Book and the Green Book movie that came out. And so we're integrating that particular conversation about how US 1 was a very segregated road. It was a common situation for that time period, but we want people to understand that story more completely. I still love the neon sign. It still looks great, but it was a bit of a tricky situation that we had to resolve. But please do come down. We've got all sorts of bits of artifacts up there, and we're always happy to host small lectures and programs out of there. That's where we run our bike tours. As we look ahead for this organization, in part, but really for the heritage area that you are now sitting within. For those of you who may live here, again, as Tim nicely said, please sign up for our e-list and we'll get you connected with that. If you work here, if you're working on a project that has to do with the history, art, or culture of this particular region, we want to get you funding. We want to increase bike tourism. We want to get more people out to this area. People come to this area largely for the Smithsonian when they're visiting, but maybe they spent all day Saturday and they are completely exhausted, and maybe on Sunday instead they want to ride a bike and just visit some of our local spots. And so we want to get them out to Marietta, for example. Hi, Stacy. To those kinds of places that are here and nearby. I just wanted to say again, with the Heritage Center, the Cider Ride, how we can fund those. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. If we can do anything with research projects, we have small pots of money. If we have big projects, I'm happy to talk with you. And that doesn't even have to be about the library here. It could be about a project you might be working on as something in your local community. Let me know and we'll have a conversation about it. My email is there, and you can certainly reach out to me and happy to talk more about it. Thank you.
So many of you know that I am a dyed-in-the-wool mass commuter from Baltimore, and So I live and breathe by the MARC train. And I mostly praise Mark because I know I would not be the happy person that I am if I had to drive every day, unlike Scott, who can somehow manages that. But I do think of Aaron every time when I get off. Sometimes I have to get off at the College Park station because Mark won't stop at Greenbelt. And I love taking the trolley trail. And anything that enhances or adds to that, I am 100% behind you on that, really.
Sounds like we need to get a bike share up here.
We might even already have it, I'm not sure. Yeah. Jill, did you want to talk now okay. Okay. So what we thought we would do is we wanted to, first of all, I thank our speakers again. I would love to, excuse me, I'd love to have questions, and I have questions, but we are kind of running behind time yet. So they, I hope, are going to stay with us and indulge in our terrific refreshments that we've got here. So the questions will probably have to be one-on-one. We wanted to recognize today one of the most important people who was responsible for this building being here. And this is a former director of the library, Foster Edward Morehart. And I knew a little about him, but thank goodness now we have someone who really knows a lot about Foster Morehart. This is our new Wikipedian in residence, Jamie Flood. Welcome her, please, if you haven't met her yet. And she's going to be, she already has really delved into the resources that are here and elsewhere to surface facts that really have kind of gotten submerged or forgotten maybe over time. The date of this building opening being a significant point, for instance. So Jamie's going to talk very quickly about Foster Morehart, and then we're going to have a special phone call, but I don't know if Jill wants to talk first, or, you know, are you getting ready to leave? No, okay, all right, okay. So we're good, and then...
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? I mumble sometimes. And then I forgot everything I was going to say. Tim asked me to give a very quick history of the library, and I feel like I can do it very quickly, leading us up to the era of Foster Morehart in the building of the library. The library began in the patent office. The first commissioner of patents, Henry L. Ellsworth, received a grant from, not a grant, received an appropriation from Congress of $1,000 in 1839 to begin collecting agriculturally related materials. With the Organic Act of 1862, Lincoln created the USDA, and he promptly appointed his friend Isaac Newton, no, not that one, to head up the department, and a year later he would announce his intention of having a library and a museum. And in 1865, the first librarian would show up on the payroll of the USDA, whom was Aaron Burt Grosh. There's not a lot of information on him. After Aaron Burt Grosh, but prior to William Cutter, who was our first librarian to actually have librarian training and to be hired through, to be appointed through civil service examination, it was very much a political role, not so much substance and science, if you will. He and Ernestine Stevens, who was the first female librarian before him, they turned the focus to science and the technical, and with the appointment of Tama Jim Wilson as Secretary of Agriculture, the library would move away from museum artifacts and collecting seeds and onto scientific publications. After Cutter, the librarians and librarian directors would continuously focus on organization, expansion, and modernization, and they would focus very heavily on innovation as well. Clarabelle Barton would be the first to implement photocopy in lieu of loan. Ralph Shaw would invent the photo clerk in the library, among other inventions and improvements, and then he would recommend Foster Morehart as his replacement in 1945. Morehart would work to computerize and modernize the library as he successfully pushed for acknowledgement of the library as the National Library. And now we'll talk more about Foster Morehart. That was supposed to be up while I said all that. So we call this the Jetsons picture because of the fancy car. So on the left, we have, well, on your right, we have Ralph R. Shaw. He left the National Ag Library in 1954 to take up publishing. He's receiving a Superior Service Award in this picture from Secretary of Agriculture Charles Brannan. Over the last few months of his directorship, he assisted with hiring his replacement, and the only external person that he felt comfortable recommending was Foster Morehart. Foster Morehart had been director of the Veterans Administration Library Service since 1948. Shaw felt that he had the drive and experience necessary to continue the important work and organization of the library. After completing he was a student at the University of Michigan. He received his PhD from Columbia, and he established a reputation of organization and precision in procurement and cataloging. He served in the Army Air Corps and the U.S. Navy during World War II, and he also helped protect the Library of Congress's more valuable collections by offering surplus space in the Washington and Lee University libraries during the war. In 1946, he served as the chief of the Library and Report Division of the Office of Technical Services, which collected and disseminated and evaluated civilian and military documents for use in public and private domains. These qualities and his accomplishments were what recommended Morehart to Shaw, and in turn, confirmed his appointment to the position. And I also want to say his daughter, Katri, sent us a bunch of pictures, and this is one of them, and she sent us some great treasures. Morehart envisioned the library not only as a national library, but as an international role model, providing resources and becoming a go-to institution for agricultural and the scientific communities at large. He worked to initiate the computerization of cataloging and indexing in the library in 1965, created the antecedent to the library's Agricola database, and he also helped develop the library's first agricultural/biological vocabulary, published in 1967. And this photo is really cool. It's him and Niall C. Brady, Director of Science and Education for the USDA, as they conduct an information retrieval demonstration during the World's Fair in New York City. And they're actually transferring back to the World's Fair. They're in the library downtown. Outside of his accomplishments, he worked to increase library space, hint, hint, and eventually helped push for the planning and construction of a new state-of-the-art facility. One of his biggest accomplishments was working with Secretary of Agriculture Orville L. Freeman, whom you'll see him a lot in these slides. They had a wonderful relationship, and in 1962, he would sign Memoranda 1492, which would call the library a national library. And this is actually Morehart looks on. He's in the back as Freeman signs the memoranda. And this is him again in Freeman as he receives the USDA Distinguished Service Award. Speaking, he was cited for outstanding vision, competence, and accomplishment in evolving and promoting a dynamic agricultural library program for the department and the nation, and for exceptional international professional leadership. Throughout the 60s, he would work to procure funding for the planning and construction of the new building. Him getting it named the National Agricultural Library would be part of that. He told Congress in 1963 that with the current inadequate library facilities, that USDA researchers, scientists, and staff would continue to work at less than peak efficiency until the space problem was resolved. And also, Representative Fred Marshall, a Democrat from Minnesota, was quoted as saying that due to the lack of proper lighting and ventilation, the library's space was unfit to even store corn. And from those quotes and from this poster, he would receive $400,000 to start planning the library and hire architects. And during that process, while he was waiting for the further funding, once they had confirmed that they were going to build rather than just repair their quarters downtown, Morehart pushed the library to run as efficiently as possible, despite his previous remarks. He maintained functions and made improvements to show Congress the necessity of a new building. And finally, in 1965, for the 1966 fiscal year, they would receive $7.5 million to begin the building. And in 1967, him and Freeman, whose back is to us, laid the cornerstone for the building. And sadly, maybe not, in 1968, he would retire, Morehart, from government service about a year before the library was completed. He helped to ensure the library's standing as a premier institution and as a standing as a national library. He was considered a diplomat by many due to his work with the International Federation of Library Associations, and in 1979, he was decorated with the Third Order of Merit and the Cordon of the Rising Sun from Japan for his services working with the National Diet Library in Tokyo. And again, we have Mr. John Sherrod on the right and Foster Morehart on the left. After Morehart, John Sherrod would take over as director of the library, and he would continue with Morehart's original plans. And during his first presentation to Congress, the chairman of the Appropriations Committee stopped Sherrod so he could go on record saying how much they had enjoyed their yearly meetings with Morehart and how much he would be missed by Congress. And as a final quote about him, this is from the Dictionary of American Library Biography. He was as much the American listener as he was the spokesman, and as such, he helped to contain national sensitivities and foster true cooperation in the work of providing equitable access to information, an arena that, in essence, has no boundaries. And now we're going to dial in from a special guest.
So one of the things that Jamie just mentioned, not only did Congress really, well, first of all, you have to, I don't know if what Jamie just said to you, you understand the importance of what occurred. The director of the National Agricultural Library every year appeared before Congress. He had to give an accounting of the library, and he was then subject to questions from the Congress people on the committee, and then he would present his request for appropriations. I mean, just amazing. And it's because of Jamie that I actually went up to the stacks last week and just started very quickly going through the committee hearings. It's a way of really understanding how NAL worked and how, again, accountable he was. The committee did indeed like Foster Morehart. And as Jamie mentioned, when John Sherrod came in, at his very first hearing, John Sherrod has only been in office as director for 1 month. And that in March of 69, he has to go before the committee after having only been in office for 1 month. And the committee says, we really miss Foster. Okay, so John Sherrod already hears that. Okay, we really liked Foster. We don't know who you are, but we like Foster. And the second thing that we learned is that the committee actually made a big point of saying to John Sherrod that, and I'm exaggerating the quote, but let me exaggerate it. You will not go wrong if you turn to Blanche Oliveri for advice and direction. Blanche Oliveri was the assistant to Foster Morehart, And the committee, as much as it liked Foster, knew that they could rely on her for the facts and figures. And so that,
Talk more about her tomorrow.
yeah, we're going to try and elevate her significance, because she really is someone who has not gotten her due. So, Tom, are you?
He's right here.
Where is he? Oh, okay. And we're going to have a special guest. No, we're calling her. No, no, no. Oh.
She said hello.
Hello? And here, I'm going to let you. Hello, Katri? Oh. Uh-oh. So what we're trying to do here, through kind of a not the most sophisticated manner, is to call Katri Morehart Nowak.
Hello?
Hello, Katri?
Yes.
Katri, this is Tim Shepke calling from the National Agricultural Library.
Yes. How are you?
I am good. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you.
Thank you so much for being on call for us. We're probably running a little bit behind, but I just wanted you to know that we are here in the main, what was the main reading room of the National Agricultural Library, a room that has now been converted into a meeting space. We have all the staff here. We've just heard a terrific presentation from our new Wikipedian in residence, Jamie Flood, who has given us a remarkable overview of your father's career. And we just wanted to connect with you to keep that link and to just hear any words of wisdom that you might have for us. And I know I'm, in a way, putting you on the spot for words of wisdom, but one of the things I wanted to ask you about is your father retired before the National Agricultural Library ever opened. Did he ever get to visit this building that he worked so hard to see its creation and opening? Did he ever make it here in Beltsville?
Yes, he did. I know he came at least once, maybe a few times, to see the building once it was completed, but it was without any fanfare or anything. Just, I'm sure it was, just to look at it and see how it all turned out. And I know he was very pleased with how it turned out.
In looking at his career, Katri, and it is an incredible the accomplishments that he did, and not only was he an amazing administrator through a number of libraries, but he also wrote frequently. It said, I don't know that it actually happened, that a bibliography, if it were created, would include over 100 works that he had written. And just this one question for you, and then we'll let you go. We know you're busy, but why did he become a librarian? Do you know what sparked his interest in libraries? And secondly, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. In doing research on Foster Morehart, I learned that not only Foster Morehart, but his brother, Charles Morehart, was a librarian, and actually very famous in Michigan. And I think he actually headed the Detroit Public Library. So it's rather amazing that you have these two librarians in the family. Do you know anything that you could share with us about that?
I really don't. Neither of his parents were librarians. His father worked for the GM for Oldsmobile. But I know my father had a love for books and a love for reading. That's all I can assume sparked his interest, and possibly when he was in school, someone inspired him. I know he worked at the library when he was in college, so maybe that's what made his decision. I really am not sure.
Well,
I'm sorry I
well,
can't help you.
well, that's fine. We do appreciate you talking with us, and also for sending us the materials that we're actually looking right now at the screen. We've often seen the picture of sort of your father's official portrait, but just today we received the two photographs of Foster Morehart when he was much younger, and we really do appreciate that. And as well, we appreciate the fact that you sent us the program for the cherry tree that was dedicated, that you were able to come to. We don't think that item actually was in our collection, so we are going to be very happy to add that as well. And we thank you for talking with us, and I hope to be in touch with you further.
Well, thank you, and thank you for remembering him. I'm sure he would be very pleased if he knew, or if he does know who. And congratulations on 50 years.
Thank you so much, Katri. Thank you for talking with us.
Well, thank you. Have a wonderful day and celebration.
I forgot to include one thing that I think you all will be entertained by. When Foster Morehart was describing the design of the building to Congress, he let them know that we were in the business of information, not moving people, and that was why he wanted a tower. And in his foresight, he hoped that there would be enough room to build another one when we surpassed 2 million volumes. So just wanted to share that as well. And I also wanted to say thank you to everyone who helped with desserts and made something and helped all this. And now Jill's going to talk.
Just more thank yous. Thank you again to our speakers, John Peter, Jean, Aaron, and Jamie, and Tim. And we appreciate the stories and insights about the history of the area that put this building in context. And thanks Tim Shepke, the work that Jamie Flood has done, Susan Fugate, who applied your creativity and skills to do a tremendous amount of research and coordination. And thanks to Scott, Sarah, Amy, Tanya, Nina, Cheryl, Tom, Stewart, Jeffrey, our NAL bakers who helped with the treats, and Yada, facility staff, and everyone on the team who made this event possible. So please enjoy the pop-up exhibit. That is really cool, and our treats. And please come back on Friday if you can for the Wikipedia Edit-a-thon. It will start at 10 a.m. Ask Jamie or Tim if you want to find out how to register. And thanks again for joining us. And Jamie's going to say one more thing, but also come visit anytime.
Please come on Friday. We're going to talk more about all this. So, but more so than that, in 1973, the staff of the library put together a cookbook, and I think we got a copy of it about a month ago, and it's already been digitized and out in the display cases. We have the original, you can see it, and on top we have some cards with the website, so you can go check it out and enjoy some treats from 1973.
Okay, thank you.
And one final thanks. The hard work, Jeff and Jamie, for putting things together. They were here. I heard from a reliable source till 10 o'clock last night. So we really appreciate that. And I don't know that we will. How are we going to do that? Okay, you're giving me that. I think what we should do is, none of you want to eat or drink anything, right? No, none of you. Okay, good. So no, I think we will go back and enjoy our 60s treats. But maybe, Jeff, you could go ahead and put the film on, and while people are eating, they could see it on the screen. What I think, Jeff, you should do is do that. What we have in the library is a film that was made. We don't know the background for it, but I'm sure that the powers that be said, we need to document the library while it's in the South Building. And so they took a camera and literally walked through the building taking a film of a day in the life of the library in 1969 before they came out here. No words, some title cards, but nothing beyond that. So we'll try and have that up there, and then you can enjoy the wonderful desserts that are here. Thank you again. Thanks. Thank you for coming.